going to dive in and talk about WandaVision, and today's episode is going to cover episode 5 of WandaVision that came out on this past Friday. Obviously, if you haven't seen that episode, you should stop this video unless you don't mind a lot of spoilers, because we're going to be talking about a lot of details of the plot and characters of this show, and also some spoilers if anything that I theorize happens to be right or revealed as part of the actual plot of the show. Then I don't want to ruin that for you if that's something you care about, so make sure if you don't want any spoilers that you click away from this video. So the next thing I want to talk about is Billy and Tommy, and if you don't know, these are Wanda's twin kids. There's a lot of interesting things about Billy and Tommy. The first one I want to talk about is the fact that they're part of a very small group of people in Westview that Wanda doesn't seem to have control over. This group of people that Wanda cannot control is very small. We have Vision, who we know she has lost control over completely. He seems to be in control of himself and able to use the abilities of the Mind Stone now. Then we have Billy and Tommy, who she can't control. She can't control when they choose to age up. She can't make them stop crying. She can't make them fall asleep. She can't make them believe anything. They're completely out of her control. We also see that she can't seem to control Agnes, but Agnes apparently is going along with what Wanda's doing based on their interactions that they have in this episode. It seems like Agnes knows what's going on and wants to please Wanda and help Wanda, but she's not being controlled by Wanda. And then the last thing that we've ever seen Wanda not be able to control on this show is the stork from the previous episode. To me, this says that there's something important about that stork, whether we're supposed to think that it's actually some kind of other worldly entity or something like that. But it's definitely got to be important if it's in this small group of 5 characters that Wanda has no control over. So it would be very odd for them to add this detail into the show and it to not actually matter or be even that much importance. So I would keep an eye out, or at least keep, a note in your head about the stork, so that you'll be paying attention to where they go with that in future episodes. So the question is, how are Billy and Tommy able to go against Wanda's wishes, and what's that mean? What's the significance of that? Well, we know from the comic books that Billy and Tommy are actually the characters Wiccan and Speed, who have their own superhuman abilities. Wiccan is Billy, and he has abilities similar to Wanda's, a type of magical power. Then Speed, or Tommy, has exactly what you'd think someone named Speed would have. He has super speed similar to Quicksilver's. And we actually know that, or it seems like it's pretty obvious that they are going to turn Billy and Tommy into Wiccan and Speed at some point, because we have seen Wiccan use his abilities. And we also get some interesting Easter eggs, like Wiccan, or Billy, is often dressed in red and black, which are the colors of his superhuman costume. And then Tommy, or Speed, is often dressed in green and yellow, which are the colors of his costume. So what's interesting is that we've seen Wiccan use his abilities a couple times on the show so far, but we've actually not seen Speed use his. We see Wiccan age himself and his brother Tommy up first to 5 years, then to 10. And we also see him have an interaction with the dog, where it appears that Billy is actually controlling the dog. He puts a treat to his head and tells the dog to speak, and the dog barks. And this might be a reach to some people, but to those of us who already believe that Billy is going to be given superhuman abilities, this looks like him exhibiting his powers. Now, I want to talk a little bit about Agnes. I think Agnes is really creepy. Agnes always shows up at the right time with whatever they happen to need in the moment. We actually see Vision point this out in a disconcerting way in this episode. He seems to know that there's something off about Agnes and the way that she interacts with their reality. She's never surprised when she sees anybody use their abilities in front of her. She always just has some kind of comedic comment to make after for the laugh track to roll, and she breaks character completely and talks to Wanda like you would in a theater class or when you're actually filming a show, and asks her if they want to start from the beginning of the set. It seems to me like she's working kind of to uphold the facade of Westview. Another interesting thing about Agnes in this episode is that she is always present when the boys age themselves up. If they're not going to make Tommy and Billy into Wiccan and Speed, then the only other explanation that I can think of is that Agnes is aging the boys up. I personally think that it is Billy doing it, but it is interesting that Agnes is in the room every single time the boys age themselves up. It's kind of weird. In this opening scene of this episode where we see Vision and Wanda trying to calm down a crying baby Billy and Tommy, Agnes has this awkward line about how you can't tame a tiger. And then just a couple minutes later in the same episode, we then see a toy tiger on the kitchen table. And the reason this is so weird to me is because we've seen magic exhibited similarly with Wanda. In previous episodes, when they are decorating the baby's room, Wanda feels a kick from the babies, and she says the word flutter. And then all of a sudden, the baby mobile above the crib, the butterflies come to life and start fluttering around the room. Like she said the word and then conjured those things to happen. So the fact that we see Agnes do the same thing where she says the word tiger and then seconds later there's a tiger toy sitting on the table says to me that it kind of affirms the idea that Agnes is Agatha Harkness, as if that needs any affirmation. And that she's exhibiting powers very similar to Wanda's. So the next thing that happens is we cut to Monica Rambeau, and she's getting her little checkup done after she's been taken in by Sword. And we get to see, after this kind of scan that's performed on her, that the test is kind of blank. They say it's blank, but if you actually look, you can see this kind of outline of light that looks like her head and shoulders. And this is where the scan was performed on her. They specifically show us that that's where they put the machine, and that's the shape that's there. And those of you who know about Photon from the comic books, a lot of people think that Monica Rambeau is going to become this character Photon. So to me, this scan is proof that she has her abilities as of episode 5 of WandaVision. But the interesting thing about this is that when the woman performing the scan says that it's odd that the scans turned out blank, can they run the tests again? Monica tells them no, and doesn't seem surprised by the fact that they didn't get any data from the scans, which to me says that there's a chance that she actually already knows that she possesses these abilities, and maybe it's not an accident. Maybe it's not from WandaVision, anything that's happened here. Maybe this has more to do with Sword's original name in the MCU, which we hear from the director and Monica talking when she first arrives at Sword after she's blipped. We hear her comment on the fact that Sword's old name used to be Sentient Weapon Observation and Creation. So it's possible that Photon is actually Monica's alter ego that's already been established through Sword, where we know that she used to work and have some kind of space missions that she would go on. So there's a chance that Monica Rambeau is already Photon, or that she got her powers from being ejected from Westview. Either way, she definitely has them by now because of that scam. So is Wanda the true villain of this show? What's interesting to me is, as much as they kind of imply that she is controlling things and that she could be turning evil, especially because we know the comic books that they're drawing from and they keep on referencing House of M. The weird thing about that is that all of the human protagonists, Darcy, Monica Rambeau, Agent Jimmy Woo, they are always constantly arguing with the other human characters we see and defending Wanda and being like, no, she's not a terrorist. What are you talking about? She's doing this out of grief. They're kind of defending her and arguing with the people that do want to call her the villain in the MCU. So it's interesting to me that they would do that if Wanda is going to turn out to be the big villain of the show. because it really seems like they're having all of the good guys on the show defending Wanda and saying that she is not the bad guy. And while we're on the subject of people that want to make Wanda out to be the bad guy, let's talk about the director of S.W.O.R.D. A lot of people are talking about how suspicious this guy actually is, and I have to agree, he seems very aggressive, like unnecessarily aggressive and determined to make Wanda the bad guy. However, I don't think this is unrealistic. If we're talking about a government agency responding to some kind of superhuman threat, I think this is kind of realistic as to what the response would be. But in the MCU, it seems like oddly aggressive and harsh. So I think they're purposely keeping it on the line, but I do think that we're going to see the director turn out to be a human adversary on the show. He has a scene where he's arguing with Agent Woo. Agent Woo is sort of defending Wanda against the idea that she's just a villain, by saying that she was she fought with the Avengers and she was a good guy. And the director counters this by asking if she has any alias or funny nicknames. And I think a lot of people just took this as a hint that we're going to see her be called Scarlet Witch in this episode, in this series. And I definitely think we are going to see that come. But what he's actually doing here is he's arguing that because she doesn't have any kind of moniker like Captain America or Captain Marvel or the Falcon, any kind of nickname, that she's not really a true hero. Which, again, is just like an odd viewpoint. But he definitely wants her to be seen as a bad guy, which is, it's just kind of overly aggressive in my opinion. This scene actually between Agent Woo and the director intrigues me a lot because I think that it is a hint, or at least the beginning of a conflict between humans and mutants coming to the MCU. This is like the main plotline of all of the X-Men stories, so if they're bringing the X-Men in, we're definitely going to see that conflict between mutants and humans. And there are always humans that hate the mutants. And I think that the director is going to be the first character that we see who's really like that. We see him taking a position against Wanda. So I think that this is them hinting at what's to come with the mutant-human conflict. Last week I talked a bit about my theory on whether or not Vision is alive. But this week we actually got to see that Wanda stormed S.W.O.R.D. and stole Vision's body from S.W.O.R.D. 9 days before we discovered Westview. So there's a few implications of this. We know from later in this episode that Wanda can't conjure something out of nothing. She has to use some kind of already existing matter, and then she can reshape it to be whatever she wants it to be. So we know that she did actually create the Vision that we see in Westview from Vision's corpse. That doesn't necessarily mean that she's being really creepy and puppeteering a dead body around, but it does mean that she brought his corpse into Westview and made the Vision that we see now from that body. Now, I just want to put a little sub note in here that as much as S.W.O.R.D. wants to make themselves out to be the good guys, we see in this moment when Wanda storms S.W.O.R.D. and takes Vision's body that they were experimenting on Vision's body. They were obviously doing something with it. It's cut into a bunch of pieces. It's connected to machines. So who knows what they've been doing with his body for the 5 years since Avengers, or I guess it's more than 5 years since Infinity War, because that's really what we're talking about. So it's very odd that we don't get to know what S.W.O.R.D. was doing with their bodies, so it was definitely something crazy. And we know that they used to be the Sentient Weapon Observation Creation Division or whatever, so it's definitely going to have implications, I think. Who knows if they could have made some kind of sentient weapons based on Vision's anatomy, but they definitely did something. Let's talk about Sparky the dog. The first time we see Sparky is in the sink. The boys, Billy and Tommy, are giving him a bath. They make the comment that he doesn't like water. This is important because it's actually a reference to Sparky from the Vision comic book series. He is an android dog, and electronics don't do well in water, so it's a joke about this robot dog from the Vision comic series. Now, in this scene, we see Agnes suddenly arrive at their house with a doghouse, the perfect item that they need in that moment, and Vision comments on this and how strange it is. The real strange thing about this scene to me, though, is this line that we hear from Agnes. In this episode, when Agnes arrives to the house carrying this doghouse for the dog Sparky, she says, "My kitchen window told me that someone got a new pooch." The reason this is such a creepy thing for her to say is that we find out later in the episode, for the first time, we see where Agnes's house supposedly is. And, well, we see this when Wanda and the boys are walking through the neighborhood looking for the dog. And it's implied that they've walked a while, and we can tell that the scenery around Agnes's house is nothing like the scenery around Wanda's house. There's some kind of church-like building in the background. It's a lot more open. It's definitely not right by Wanda's house. So how did Agnes look out her kitchen window and see that Billy and Tommy had a dog? That's super creepy. It implies that, one, she's lying and that's not how she knew they had the dog. Or two, her creepy kitchen window can see all over the town. And I don't know, it was just super creepy, especially if you combine it with the fact that in the first episode, when we initially see Agnes, she comes to Wanda's door and she says, "I'm your neighbor to the right." And then she says, "Not your right, my right." But from where she's standing, Wanda's neighbor to Agnes's right would be the house where Herb lives. So we know that Wanda doesn't live, or we know that Agnes doesn't live there because we see that Herb lives there. And this is really odd because this implies, so first it sounds like Agnes is saying she lives where Herb lives. Then she says she could see it from her kitchen window, which implies that she lives across the street from Wanda. But then we find out that she really lives a long walk away from Wanda. So I don't understand where Agnes is actually supposed to live. And it's really creepy because we've not actually seen her inside of a house that is hers. We've only seen her make comments that she lives in certain places that don't actually make sense for her to live in. So the next scene it jumps to is back at SWORD. We see Agent Wu, Monica Rambeau, and Darcy Lewis all talking about this kind of vehicle she can build to re-enter Westview. And Monica Rambeau says she knows an aerospace engineer who'd be up for this challenge. The question is, who could this aerospace engineer be? There's a lot of people that are saying it's Reed Richards from the Fantastic Four. They're wrong. Don't listen to them. If Marvel wanted to, or Disney wanted to bring Reed Richards into the show, they would not describe him as a aerospace engineer. That's the most underwhelming way you could describe Mr. Fantastic. If we're going to talk about aerospace engineers, the realistic answers as to who Monica Rambeau would be talking about and just pulling out her phone to text, I think, is Ironheart. It would make sense for aerospace engineering to be her field. That's War Machine's field. He's actually the only person so far identified as an aerospace engineer on the show, but I think it's going to be Ironheart, so that they can set up the Ironheart series, and just because it makes sense, Ironheart would be a reasonable assumption for a peer of Monica Rambeau's. It wouldn't be ridiculous for them to know each other and be friends and collaborate on projects. They're in the same age range, same demographic, and they're both awesome. So I think it's going to be their opportunity to introduce Ironheart before they just give her own series. So what's with the scene about bulletproof pants? There's a couple of things that are important from this. First of all, we see that Wanda cannot create anything out of nothing. She has to reshape already existing matter. this actually supports a big theory from the comic books. Wanda's kids, Billy and Tommy, are actually created out of the shards of a soul of a demon named Mephisto, and she uses the fragments of his soul to create her children. So if we know that Wanda cannot create anything out of nothing, it kind of implies that she may have done this and used fragments of someone's soul, maybe Mephisto's, to create her children. So what the heck happened at Vision's office? First we see him get this really weird email, apparently from S.W.O.R.D. It would be interesting to know who could have sent this email. If it was intentional to send an email to Vision, I think that the only answer to this is that it was Dr. Darcy Lewis, and maybe Agent Wu was in on it with her, but they're the two that we don't see present during the interaction with the flying the drone into Westview. So it's possible that they could have been collaborating to send this email into Westview separate from what the rest of S.W.O.R.D. was working on. Now, another thing that I noticed in this scene is if you look on the background on this kind of filing cabinet in Vision's office, you can see this like big pirate ship looking sailboat. And I thought this was just kind of a weird decor option for his office. Like, there's no reason that a boat would be the decoration they picked. It's not like a theme inside of his office. It kind of stands out from the rest of it. And after seeing this, I actually noticed that in Wanda and Vision's house, they have a painting of a sailboat above their fireplace, and they have a like a wooden sailboat decoration on the stairs in their house. I don't know what this could represent, but it all seems kind of out of place to me, so my best guess would be that this is a reference to the Truman Show. He uses a sailboat in the Truman Show to try and leave his little fake town, and as he's leaving, the sailboat actually punctures the fake skyline, and that's one of the first times you see that he is in this big building. He's not actually out in the world, so it could be a reference to that, maybe, but I guess we'll see. And the last thing is, during his interaction with Norm, when he's woken up, says that, she's in my head, she's controlling me, it hurts, you have to make her stop, but he doesn't actually identify Wanda as the person he's talking about. This is interesting because it leaves it open to other people who could be exhibiting control over the town, like Agnes. So there's a chance that we're just trying to make it be somebody other than Wanda, but I do think it's interesting that they chose to leave this open. A little later in the episode, we see Billy, Tommy, and Wanda all in the living room with Sparky the dog, and Billy is teaching the dog to do tricks. He holds the treat up to his head and he says, "Speak," and then the dog barks. The reason this is interesting is because right after this, Wanda says, "Bravo, Billy," instead of like, "Good job, Sparky," or something like that. She's congratulating Billy and telling Billy he did a good job, because maybe she knows that Billy is using his powers to control the dog. She's congratulating him on his use of his powers, not the dog on doing the trick. A little bit later in this scene, we see Wanda sit down on the couch in this scene that really puts emphasis on what she says to the boys. She says to them that they will always be each other's brothers. The reason that I thought this was interesting is because we're talking about a show that's about to introduce the multiverse, and she's telling them they will always be each other's brothers. The reason this was interesting to me is because Tommy and Billy, Wiccan and Speed, have never been depicted in comic books any other way than as brothers. Tommy and Billy are always brothers. Wiccan and Speed are always brothers. So it's almost like she's saying, no matter what universe you're in, no matter what timeline you're in, you're always going to be brothers. I just thought that was kind of interesting. Next we see Wanda being confronted by a drone sent in by S.W.O.R.D. So she has this confrontation with the drone, then she takes the drone and she leaves Westview and throws it at the director's feet. In this moment we see that Wanda is definitely the one broadcasting the show. because when she leaves Westview, the broadcast ends. Wanda refers to him as director, like she already knows who he is. This could just be because she broke into SWORD to steal Vision's body, but there's also a chance that she had a previous interaction with him that we don't know about. And then lastly in this scene, we see her flip all of the guns to face the director, and this is definitely a callback to Magneto controlling all the weapons when he's confronted by the cops. This was super satisfying to me to see, just because of the connection between Magneto and Wanda, but also because we know from Paul Bettany's comments and interviews that there is a big name actor that appears in WandaVision that he had always wanted to work with, and a lot of people have been trying to figure out who this is, and I think there's a good chance it could be Sir Ian McKellen, who plays Magneto. It would be very fun if this is a reference or hint that he'll be showing up very soon. After this, we see a commercial for Legis paper towels. The wife spills a red liquid that looks very similar to the color of Wanda's superpowers. And this is representative of her accidentally blowing up Wakandan relief workers in Legis in the Captain America Civil War movie. Then there's a line at the end of the commercial. We see the husband actually knock down a glass of yellow liquid, which looks to be the same color as Vision's abilities. And the line in the commercial says, "Husbands can use it too." And this reference, his accident, is a reference to when he fires at Falcon during Civil War and misses and hits War Machine and sends him falling, which paralyzes him. So we get to see a reference to both of their mistakes with their powers and the consequences that they had. Later in the episode, back at home, we see an argument between Vision and Wanda over the reality of Westview. He knows that something's wrong, knows that the people are in pain, and he definitely believes Wanda's the one doing it. We also get to see that Vision doesn't know anything about his life before Westview, and he's much more capable of emotions than he was before, so it implies that whatever Wanda did to bring him back, he's definitely more than he was before. He's less artificial intelligent and much more human. And then I liked that Vision doesn't believe Wanda at the end of this conversation. He wants to, but he feels like he would be ignoring the evidence right in front of him if he believed that Wanda wasn't the one in control. I really like this because I felt like that's exactly how I feel watching the show, is I really want to believe that she's not behind it all, but you'd have to be ignoring all the obvious things that are happening. Next we see them move over to the living room, they sit down, and Wanda is telling Vision that she doesn't know how this all started, she's not the one controlling everything. This is weird because we actually do know that she knows that she's in this reality, and it sounds like she knows how it started based on her interaction when she leaves Westview and is yelling back and forth with the SWORD members. So I think she's lying to Vision here when she's telling him she doesn't know how it started and she's not controlling things. However, I feel like she's actually possibly surprised when she sees Pietro at the door. I don't necessarily think that she brought him there or had him ring the doorbell. So that's an interesting thing. I definitely think she's lying about not knowing how it started and what's going on, but I don't think that she brought Pietro there. Which brings us right into our next topic. Is that really Pietro standing at the door at the end of the episode? I do think that this is the Fox version of Quicksilver. I definitely think this is the actual character from that and not like a weird reincarnation of him or anything like that. But I do think he seems odd in this scene. His demeanor is off. He's not as carefree as he is in the Fox universe. He seems pretty weird. The way he's talking, the way he's standing there. I don't know if it's just an awkward scene, or if this is intentional. But something seems off about him being there for sure. So the question is, if this actually is Quicksilver from the Fox universe, why is he there and how did he get there? I have a couple of theories about this. All of them could be wrong, but this is what I've come up with. The first one is that Wanda wanted to bring Pietro back, so she conjured her brother up to Westview using her magic powers. But because the Quicksilver from her reality is dead, and she can't get the body, she had to pull Pietro in from the multiverse. And maybe just the random one she found was the Fox one. I don't think this is the most likely theory, but it's one that seems possible. The second theory is that Westview, contrary to what I said last week, maybe Westview actually is bound by the restrictions of whatever decade it's in. So we know that they were able to send an 80s drone in because the decade that Westview was in at the moment was the 80s, and so it was left unchanged. So maybe whoever brought Pietro into Westview had to find a Pietro or Quicksilver from the 80s so that he would fit inside of Westview without being altered. So we know that this version of Quicksilver in the last movie was in the 80s, so maybe they pulled in the 80s version of Pietro or Quicksilver. And the last one, and my favorite one, it's just totally possible, and I love it, and it's the best idea ever, and you should agree with me. My theory, my real theory that I personally think is what will happen, is that the Maximoff anomaly, whatever Wanda is doing in Westview, is affecting other realities and timelines already. Whatever she's doing is causing like a ripple effect through the multiverse. And that the X-Men in the Fox universe have identified the problem and decided to send someone into Westview to try and stop Wanda from the inside. And the reason that they sent Pietro is because they were able to find out that Wanda and Quicksilver were brothers in that reality, so they decided to send Pietro from their reality in to try and stop her. And that's why he seems uncomfortable when he meets Wanda at the door, and it would explain how he could be the version of Quicksilver that we've seen from the Fox X-Men movies, and how he got there and why he would go there. That's the theory that I like, and it would open the door for us to see any other X-Men characters we want in the future. I will say that if something brought Quicksilver in against his will and he doesn't go there intentionally, then we could see X-Men entered into the MCU because they're coming in after Quicksilver trying to rescue him. We could definitely see Magneto if this is the case, because even though him and his son are not on the same side in the Fox movies, he could still go there to rescue his son because it is his son. Then some overall theories that I have been thinking about for WandaVision in general is, first of all, that Agent Wu's missing person could be a Skrull. This would explain why he thought that the Skrulls could possibly be behind what's happening in Westview. When he writes that on the board, that the Skrulls could possibly be responsible. If he has a Skrull witness protection, then he might have reason to believe that the Skrulls would come after that person. And it would also explain why Jimmy Woo hasn't been able to identify them on the show, because he doesn't know what they look like. This could even explain why Dottie hasn't been identified. Whoever the missing person is could be Dottie, and that would explain why the missing person is an important character in the show, because they would be an important person in the town. And it would explain why Dottie, who's supposed to be an important person in this town, hasn't been identified. And then my last theory is that America Chavez, who we know is going to be in the next Doctor Strange movie, will show up in WandaVision. In the comic books, she's from this kind of utopian reality, and her reality is attacked by some kind of multi-dimensional forces. So if the anomaly is affecting other timelines and realities, then America Chavez could come there to stop Wanda. So let me know what you think about the theories that I talked about in this episode. If you agree with me or disagree with me, or have your own theories, please share them in the comments. I'd love to hear what they are. Do you think that this is really Quicksilver at her door, or that we're seeing a villain disguising themselves as her brother? What characters do you think they're going to bring into the show first? Are we going to see more X-Men, or are we going to see more superheroes that we know are going to be introduced later on? So yeah, let me know your theories. Let me know what you think about mine in the comments. Like this video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Soon I'll be releasing a video about everything you need to know before you watch WandaVision to get you up to speed on all of their storyline from the previous movies, in case you don't want to rewatch all the movies, or if you want to watch WandaVision but you haven't seen all of their story yet. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.